Hey, that's Gen X, not a boomer. You know, snowboards, X Games, and Red Bull. You're welcome.
Hey, ladies and gentlemen, we're here to talk about economics, politics, foreign policy, veterans issues, reform the criminal justice system, and drug laws. This channel probably will offend you, but most importantly, this is where socialism comes to die.
Hey, ladies and gentlemen, I'm back. Thanks for bearing with me while I got through some trying times with school. And for the record, yes, it is part of it is complete now, and I actually did way better than I thought I was going to do. So thank you for bearing with me because the subscribers are what makes this channel what it is. If it wouldn't be for you guys, I wouldn't have kept this up. So thank you. Two, I'll have another video up on Saturday where we'll talk kind of what's going on with Cuomo and some of the other stuff. The Democrats that couldn't get anything passed before they went on recess in August. We'll just bring up that stuff. And I'd like to say, as we're going into this conversation about this, it's conversations with millennials, and it really came about almost by accident. But in going into it, I did not see the original post that led to this discussion. But I will say, when I reference nieces, it involves two of my nieces and my daughter. And I've got a lot of sisters and a lot of nieces and a couple of nephews. So I'll try to explain it as best I can to keep the storyline straight so you'll understand. But what I will say going into this is, yes, I'm a Gen Xer. I'm not a boomer. By no means am I a boomer. So, like I said, X Games and Red Bull, you're welcome. And if you're a boomer or a Gen Xer and you get a chance to actually sit down with millennials, they don't have to be your children or your nieces and nephews, but if you get the chance to actually sit down and have a legitimate discussion with them, don't shut down their ideas. If you can factually show them where their idea may not be right, then do it, but do it in a tactful manner so they'll take it. Because that's what I did in this discussion. And it turned out to be really productive. And it also gave me a better idea of my daughter and my niece, who I do talk to fairly regularly. And going into this, I talked to them daily for about a week. But we had a really good discussion where we were both able to point out where we disagreed and both walk away with a little bit more knowledge about how each other thinks about certain subjects. And that's really important because that's how they'll understand what's going on. And it really was refreshing for me to know that millennials, everybody throws this at them that they're lazy, that they're this, that they're that. But I'll tell you, there's studies out there that'll tell you millennials would rather do a job they believe in for $40,000 a year than a job they have no faith in for $100,000 a year, which I find kind of impressive in a way if you're somebody who tries to stand for principles or tries to stand for doing what's right. But the discussion we had came about because one of my nieces, and as I said, I didn't read the actual post of the answers, so everything with this is secondhand, posted on Facebook about BLM and a few other things that were going on in our nation. And one of the responses she got back was that she didn't know what she was talking about, just basically shutting her down and talking about how she wasn't raised right. And my niece, to my sister and brother-in-law's credit, is in her early 20s, a college graduate, really intelligent young lady, responded that her parents raised her to think for herself. And I am so proud of that comment because I think as parents, that is the biggest thing you can do is raise your kids to think for themselves. Even if they don't agree with your beliefs, their ability to think for themselves is what is going to continue to make our nation great. And I 100% agree that she's allowed to post whatever she wants. Now, as I said, we moved into the discussion because they were telling me about it. So we started talking about BLM and a few of the other things that was happening. And we got on the subject of defund the police. And their whole point was, well, defund doesn't mean to stop paying police or shut down police departments. And I pointed out how AOC and Ilhan Omar had actually said defund means get rid of the police. And they accepted that because factually that's what actually happened. But what they were getting at was, as you defund police, these funds should go to mental health and training and things like this. And I completely agree with them. I personally feel after going through the crisis intervention training with the Missouri Department of Corrections, that was one of the stressful courses I have ever attended because the role players they had, it was almost a no-win situation, but it was good because it made you think through what was going on. It made you react. Because yes, there are certain, in fact, my mother brought up that a certain parish sheriff's department can have a civilian, basically social worker on the scene within 15 or 20 minutes if they're dealing with a person in a mental crisis. But my point was, we need to do a better job of training police to deal with the first 5 or 10 minutes and de-escalating when you're dealing with somebody going through a mental break, because that first 5 or 10 minutes is the most crucial. Because once you can de-escalate at that point, then you have time to bring in a professional to handle a little bit longer term. So it's not a matter of defunding, it's a matter of additional training and more stringent requirements, actually. But with that comes, you also have to increase their pay, because for what they're getting paid, you can only increase the requirements so much. And this is something all three of us agreed on, my niece, my daughter, and myself, that some of the training is lacking. There's better training out there that they could be receiving, but it would actually be more expensive as opposed to less. And the example with defunding, where you take that money and put it in other services, you can use New York City as an example, because they cut $1 billion from New York City Police Department budget. And you got to keep in mind the NYPD is the largest law enforcement agency in the United States, I think the world, actually. But at any given moment, there's somewhere between 31,000 and 35,000 police, if I remember. I don't have the numbers right in front of me. I should have looked it up before I did that. So feel free to fact check me and let me know in the comments if I was that far off. But they cut $1 billion from the budget. Now, with that $1 billion, they laid out this money was going to go to mental health, this money was going to go to schools, this money was going to go to the homeless, and that's great, because those are populations that need it. Those are things that we need to spend more money on. I will not argue that at all. My issue was, when you added all of it up together, it was less than $300 million. So basically, Comrade de Blasio cut $1 billion from his police budget to make up for shortfalls other places in his budget for the city, which he already had long before defund, long before BLM. And he knew it was coming. This was just a good excuse to do it. And by doing it this way, it's very disingenuous. And oh, by the way, how about you account for the other $600,000 plus, or $600 million plus, that you didn't? Where's that going to go? Is that to pay for your wife's staff? Because we all know about that. And when you bring up things like this, millennials, if they're being honest with themselves, will stop and think. And when they stop and think, you'll get some great answers from them about what they really think about our country, the direction it's going, and which direction they want it to go. And it makes me very hopeful for the next generation. I'm not one of those people that's going to sit there and, oh, they're lazy, they're this or that. Why? Because boomers did it to my generation. There's people in my generation that do it about millennials. Millennials will do it about the next generation, and so on and so on. And we've done that from the very beginning of time. And it's the wrong answer. The conversations you can have in welding this understanding to make our country a better place and to make the world a better place. Because no, one person cannot change the world, but you have a bubble theory. You affect the people that surround your bubble. And if you affect them in a positive manner and you give them good skills and you allow them to express themselves and think through what's going on in their minds and to give their opinions about what's happening in the world, then they infect those that surround their bubble. And eventually your ability to sit and listen, not to always talk, but to listen. Because a lot of that conversation was me listening, because I really wanted to see what they thought about it, because it was a conversation we've never really had. And I've never really had the opportunity to sit down with someone that much younger than me. And to put it into perspective for you, my niece is 17 and my daughter is 18. So it's important for them to be able to go through this and to feel that their opinions are respected and their thoughts are important, because they are. And it's the same daughter that we had a discussion driving back from somewhere. It was about a 35-minute drive, and the election was coming up, and she asked me, how do you decide who to vote for? So I went through the process of what I do. And it's not I've said it before, I've never voted a straight party ticket in my life. I look at candidates as they are and what they have done. And I really don't even look at the promises, because we all know they're full of crap. But okay, here's this candidate's policies. Here's how I feel about these things. Which candidate most closely aligns with my beliefs and my thoughts and what I think needs to happen? And it doesn't matter if they're Democrat, Republican, Libertarian, or Independent. It's you pick out certain policies that are the most important to you. And I'm not a one policy voter, never have been. And the policies important to me adjust by election depending on what's going on in the country. In explaining this to her, you could see her mind absorbing all this information because she wasn't old enough to vote in that election, but she will be in the next one in 2022. And I think she will make an educated decision because she also brought up a good point during this discussion of getting rid of political parties altogether. And on one hand, it seems like a great idea, but it's not going to happen because like minded people group together. And that's why we have the parties we have now. And we've always had them since the founding of our country. But one thing I agree with 100%, and I brought it up to her and she thought it was a great idea, was on ballots, get rid of the R's, the D's, the I's, the L's, the G's. Get rid of it. Just have the candidate's name. That way, when you go to vote, you have to have actually done your due diligence on what candidate you want to vote for. And she loved that idea. I firmly believe that's what we should do, because that way you can't just go in and vote straight party ticket. You actually have to dig in and do some due diligence and figure out who these people are, what they stand for, and if they're truly going to support what they say they do. Because I think where it stands now, we're 7 months into the Biden administration. The economy is a shambles and inflation keeps going up. And those comments that there was a small bounce based on COVID or this or that or the other, well, building a house costs 6% more now than it did in January. Your groceries on average are 8 to 13% higher than they were in January. And the inflation is still going up. Immigration, they've done nothing. They opened the borders, and now that we have the Delta variant floating around, it's these people are coming in, some of which aren't infected. It's just statistically a fact. They've got to be based on the overall population of the world and how many people are infected with it, and being put up in hotels where they're not being actually quarantined or self-quarantined because they're responsible to themselves. And I don't have a huge issue with allowing immigrants to come into our country. I don't. Our country is founded on immigrants. I firmly believe that. I think the entire time I was in the military, I saw many soldiers come in on green cards and become U.S. citizens, and the pride they had when they became citizens and the pride they took in serving this country. With that being said, they have done nothing to actually change our rules and laws and policies about immigration. Why? Because our legislators refuse to do the hard work of what they get paid to do. There will not be a budget this year, just like there wasn't last year and the year before and the year before, because they're so busy fighting about other things. The one thing they're all paid to do is to pass a federal budget. And they have failed to do it consistently every year for at least the last 8 years off the top of my head. And I think it goes back farther. And no one is holding them accountable. Immigration reform, true immigration reform. Biden, for everything he says, had 8 years as vice president, 30 years as a legislator to actually do something meaningful with immigration or criminal justice. Well, we know he did with criminal justice in 94. He's responsible for a bill which led to more men of color being locked up than at any time since the Civil War. Yes, that's what you did, Uncle Joe. So I don't want to hear, come on, man. How about you actually fix it? You had 8 years to do it as vice president. 7 months in, what have you actually accomplished? The vice president, the top cop of California when she was the attorney general, left people in prison to work as wildland firefighters, even though she knew one of them in particular was innocent. You really think these two are going to do anything for criminal justice reform? Do you really think they're going to push our feckless Congress to do anything about immigration? No, they're going to keep trying to come up with ways to hand out free money and destroy our economy even more. Now, the good part is because we live in the United States of America, We know that in 2022, we can hold legislators accountable if people go in there and vote and do their due diligence and want to see a change. And the change I see at this point is we vote everybody out. If they've been there for more than 2 terms, they need to go. Nancy Pelosi has been there since before I was born, I think. And all she does is argue and infight. Chuck Schumer, same thing. Oh, don't think I forgot about you, Lindsey Graham, because you're no better. And Ted Cruz, for all his big talk, I'm sorry, do something, impress me. If not, it is time to vote them all out. And the argument is, and it's the term limit argument. Well, what you do is you end up with legislators that really don't know that much, so they have to rely on other people. Well, I've seen it in Missouri, but you know what I also know is people with no experience, could they really do a worse job than what we have now? Congress accomplishes nothing. The president and vice president are accomplishing nothing. Name one thing they have accomplished in the comments or tell me in my social media. One thing they've actually accomplished. And no, the vaccine doesn't count because that was actually done by doctors and medical researchers. And it was actually the last administration that got that through. And yet I haven't seen a single one of those medical researchers or doctors nominated for a Nobel Prize. Anybody else notice that? Anybody else find it interesting that the ones that did the hard work are not getting credit for it? Well, they get credit. They get lip service. Where are their awards? In having this discussion or this conversation with my niece and my daughter, it really was good because I got to vent a lot about my frustrations that I hope, because let's face it, when it comes to Congress, when it comes to politics in general, the boomers failed. My generation is currently failing. Maybe they can make a difference. Maybe they can come up with term limits. Maybe they can come up with ways to force Congress to do what they're supposed to do. I don't know. What I do know is something needs to change, and something needs to change now. And we can start that right now. You have a voice. You can have a YouTube channel. You have a social media presence if you start to build one. You can give your opinion. And you know what? Sometimes people are going to call you out for doing that. I get called out on Twitter and on Instagram by people who have called me everything from an alt-right nationalist to a liberal pansy. And pansy wasn't the word they used, but I would like to keep this video monetized, so I'll leave it at that. When in all reality, I'm neither. If I had to classify myself politically, I'd be a conservative-leaning libertarian. But I believe in a lot of our social welfare programs that we do need them. We just need better management of them. We need more individualistic plans for the people actually receiving that help. So that it doesn't become a choice of, well, I can go to work, but I can't afford my kids if I go to work because I get all these benefits. If we come up with individualistic plans, then we can help them work their way out of that system and break the cycle that many of them grew up in. And it's not an ideal race. You know, I listened to Tim Pool had Charlie Kirk and Bosch on last night, and they had a pretty interesting conversation about reparations and how reparations should be done. And what it all came down to is you have poor and not poor. And where I grew up, in many ways, I didn't see a lot of racial issues, but it was poor and not poor. And many times the poor stuck together regardless of race because all you had was each other. And they were generous and they would help the people in their neighborhood. And now we're creating racial divides where that's not happening as much as it used to. And it saddens me. It deeply saddens me that we've come to this point. And I was able to express this to a 17 and 18-year-old, and they got it. They understood. They understood the pain I have when I look at some of the things going on in our world. They understood that I can support racial justice, but not support corrupt organizations where somebody will say on a video that they're a trained Marxist or a socialist and then buy multi-million-dollar homes. Or another who bought an $800,000 home. It's like I said in my short deal, probably about 3 weeks ago now, I can't afford to be a socialist or a Marxist because I can't afford a multi-million-dollar home. Yes, I'm talking about you, Bernie. But that's the way our world, that's what our world has become. You have something that could be a good idea and could be very powerful to bring good and bring justice to the world, but their leadership is corrupt. And nobody calls them into account over the leadership being corrupt because they're a fellow Marxist or a fellow socialist or just a Democrat politician in general, like AOC or Ilhan Omar, who look into some of Ilhan Omar's stuff and you'll find some really shady personal stuff going on that I really wonder about. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that's all I got for you today. As I said, thank you for bearing with me while I took this sabbatical to get some other stuff done. Saturday, I'll have another video up and we'll talk about Cuomo. And there's some other research I'm doing based on what I heard with the Vosh interview or the debate with Vosh last night. Please like, subscribe, share with your friends. Keep this channel growing. And please, if you have any desire to do it, create your own social media presence. Start your own YouTube channel. Start using social media to, okay, I'm going to go ahead and steal a line. Start using social media to start being the change you want to see. Don't allow them to keep getting away with it. All right, everybody have a good